I'm a former police officer. There's one call my partner and I took that I'll never forget. I'm Jay Miles, and I want to share a story with you that stuck with me for years. I joined the force many decades ago. It was my redemptive way of giving back to society. When I was younger, in my mid-20s, I committed petty crimes in a desperate attempt to fit in. The culture at the time was one that admired bad boys, and having a record was cool to most people. I grew out of that. I was partnerless for some of the 911 calls I responded to, and I'm just thankful to whatever being exists out there that I had a partner for this call in particular. Our police cruiser was parked in a dark alleyway, tucked between its brick walls so as to catch speeding drivers. It was around 1 a.m. when we received the dispatch. Someone called about a woman who was walking the streets barefoot with her baby while murmuring things to herself. That's all we were told. We arrived at the scene. My partner Rob and I were on edge the moment we got there, not least because Cinder Valley was a notoriously bad neighborhood. After circling the area a few times, the woman was nowhere to be found, so we decided to park the cruiser and knock on some doors. The 911 caller was anonymous, so we weren't able to speak with them directly. Most folks were asleep at that hour, and we had to settle for whoever happened to be walking the streets that night. "You see that?" said Rob. Someone disappeared behind a wooden gate by a house, and we just missed them. Rob and I jogged over to see if we could get to this person, our possible suspect. I could see folks in their homes peeking through curtains, staring curiously at the two cops running around in their neighborhood. It looked like the suspect had entered someone's backyard through an opened gate, so we flipped on our flashlights and followed. The backyard was pitch black, and we couldn't see anything that wasn't within the narrow beams of our flashlights. I noticed my partner's light was shaking mildly. "You okay?" I asked him. "I'm fine." "It's okay to be scared, man," I said, chuckling. "Screw off." A rusty swing set moved at the wind, and the trees around us sounded their leaves. My body shivered, not at the cold breeze, but at the atmosphere. If I was unsettled, I could only imagine how much more my partner was. Excuse me, sir." The homeowner suddenly opened her back door. "Sorry, ma'am," I said. "We'll be off your property in no time. I didn't mean to scare you. My partner and I are looking for a woman who was reported—" "Officer, I can't hear too well. Would you mind coming inside?" I went inside to speak with the homeowner while Rob continued searching the backyard. I explained that we were looking for a woman who was behaving strangely and walking around the neighborhood with a baby in hand. While talking with the homeowner, Rob screamed from outside. "You okay? What happened?" I asked. It looked as if he had witnessed a ghost appear before his very eyes, then vanish into thin air. "I saw her." "The woman? What did she look like?" "Come on, Rob, talk." He took a moment and caught his breath, with his hand over his heart. "She ran up the wall, right in front of me. She ran up that wall, Jay, like an animal." He pointed at the two-story house. I didn't know what to make of that. Rob didn't have a history of mental illness that I was aware of, and he certainly wasn't on drugs. I knew him, and I knew him for a comfortable amount of time to be able to say with confidence that he would never make things up, especially when it was serious, like police work. Well, I began awkwardly. "Did you see which way she went after she climbed the wall?" "The bushes over that metal gate there," he said, flashing his light at it. "I saw them moving." With our guns drawn, we hopped over the gate and searched the next-door neighbor's property. "Wait," said Rob. "I heard you call for backup. Shouldn't we wait for them?" "No, we can do this. Just us two." This backyard was even bigger than the other, but it was just as dark. We aimed our flashlights at a wooden shed sitting at the corner of the yard, and before we took another step towards it, we heard someone crying. It sounded like a baby. "Police, open up!" I knocked down the door of the shed and we cleared the inside. The woman wasn't there, but there was a baby, a plastic one. Rob pointed his light on the ground of the shed. "The hell is this?" A mechanical baby doll that could play recorded sounds, placed there by someone for the purpose of luring people, was not something that sat right with me. Not a moment after that, Our ears rang at a blood-curdling, high-pitched scream coming from the first house whose backyard we searched. As I dashed back to the other house, I noticed Rob wasn't even following. He wasn't even moving. "Let's go, what the hell are you doing?" I yelled. Rob's eyes widened as he glared at me, his mouth agape. I just can't, Jay, sorry." I didn't have time to argue with him, so I continued on and hopped over the gate and entered the old woman's house. "What's wrong?" I asked her. "I saw her, she was right there." The old woman pointed outside to her backyard, at a spot on the ground that was just by the glass door. "She was just there, just standing and looking at me, and I think she smiled." "Okay, which way did she—" Another scream. Rob's. By the time I made it back over to the shed, Rob was nowhere to be found. The plastic baby was gone too. I called out for him and looked everywhere, but he was simply gone. You know, it was like this mysterious woman could smell fear. It's something that she seemed to prey on, and Rob had plenty of it that night. When backup finally arrived, I explained to my higher-ups at least a few hundred times what had transpired. This all took place decades ago, and Rob hasn't been found since. It's a cold case. When I think back on this night, it shivers my spine like nothing else. That mysterious woman, she was playing a game with the two of us, and it feels like she won from experience. I'm not even sure why I'm still referring to her as a woman, as a human being. Because if Rob's description of her is any indication, she was something else. A full year passed by and I went through different partners. I was stationed in the same city, and sometimes my new partner John and I had to report calls that came from Cinder Valley. Eventually, I almost forgot about it all, but I never forgot Rob, wherever he was, dead or alive. That didn't last long. One night, while sitting in our cruiser, John and I received a dispatch. It seemed like another ordinary call until the operator mentioned something about a woman talking to herself on the street with a crying baby in hand. I'm a former police officer. I have another unforgettable story to share. It's Jay Miles again, a cop with a useless English degree, here with another story. They are my foggy accounts of events that took place many decades ago, and while some are difficult to remember, others are quite clear and very memorable. My partner John and I were dispatched to a bar around 11:12 p.m. "There's someone crying in the dumpster." That's what the caller told the operator. John lowered the passenger window and stuck out his hand as I reversed our cruiser from the diner. "This is what we gotta cancel our lunch break for? I'm calling it now, some drunk guy." We arrived at the bar and saw a woman waiting by the entrance, smoking a cigarette, her shoulders to her ears. She took a last puff and pressed it against a brick wall. "He's over there," she said, raising her chin towards the alleyway. "I just want to close up the bar and get home already. These homeless people, I don't have time for their games." John seemed to agree as he leaned against the cruiser, arms crossed, yawning. "Okay," he began. "We'll take it from here, just head on home, ma'am." As she walked back to her car, the woman stopped and looked back. "Oh, and by the way, he keeps apologizing about something. I don't even know, fellas, probably drunk, but very emotional about whatever he did." The streets and sidewalks were empty, except for stray cats and dogs and a skunk or two. The stench from that alleyway was like moldy cheese, not to mention alcohol and urine. It all comes with the job, of course. Would I prefer the title of an FBI agent who battles white-collar crimes under the AC of his cubicle? Yes. But this job had thrills of its own, ones that never bore. I gave John a look. "You want to get in there and do your job?" "Me? Come on, officer," he joked. "You're supposed to take me under your wing. All those years of experience, I could learn a thing or two from your old ass." Okay, fair enough. I just thought your bald spot would reflect the moonlight and blind the suspect for us. Make our jobs easier, you know. We made our way between the buildings, where there was only black. The sodium streetlights casted our shadows onto the wall, like a couple of armed men pursuing a burglar in a cartoon. John cursed when he stepped into a puddle and turned his flashlight to the ground. "Wait," I said, my hand on his chest. Hear that? We listened in. Drops of water fell through a drain and splashed deep underground. A family of rats scratched somewhere in the corners. Crispy leaves brushed against concrete. And a mysterious man sobbed. That woman was right. The man was sincere in his cries. We couldn't understand most of what he uttered, not least because he was hiding and speaking in gentle whispers. Still the words, "I'm so sorry" and "God forgive me" were audible and repeated. There was something off about the man's voice. Perhaps it was slouchy because he was drunk. Each word was droopy, falling off his mouth like a bowling ball rolling over a cliff. I flashed my light his way and saw his hunched shadow, but not him. He pulled patches of hair from his head as he rocked back and forth on the ground, leaning his back on the dumpster. His cries and wails, although low, were the stuff of nightmares. They stiffened my bones and put me on alert for any sudden movement on his part, and I could feel the same happening to John, who was following close behind me. I tapped my shoes against wet concrete. "Sir." He ignored me and rambled on. "We got a call from a concerned citizen. Said someone was crying in the alleyway," I said. Still nothing. I looked over my shoulder. "Johnny boy, now's your chance. Go help the man and let's get out of here." John hesitated a moment, then flashed his light at the man and approached him. The man moved so that his back was to us, and we could see the missing hair from his head, but we still hadn't identified him. All the information he gave us were his constant apologies for some crime he claims to have committed. "I'm so sorry, God. Please forgive me." John squinted and leaned towards him. "You see that?" The man's earlobes dripped blood. Suddenly a scream. Not from the man, but from across the alleyway by the park. We rushed towards it, leaving him behind. We ran towards what we believed was an actual emergency, an actual situation that needed our attention. But the truth was that my partner and I were glad to have an excuse to get the hell away from that alleyway and as far as possible from that man. When we reached the park, we found a woman, panting and crying, with a barking German shepherd at her side. Her hands cupped her mouth and nose as she retreated from the dead body on the ground. Some poor old lady lay on the park pathway, her face missing. The jogging woman suddenly let out another blood-curdling scream as she jumped and pointed at someone behind us. It was the man. He followed us from the alleyway, and when we saw him, we knew why his words sounded slouched and muffled. We knew why he apologized over and over again. We knew now what he had done. "Please, I didn't mean to," he said, grabbing at his eyes and limping towards us. The man had somehow stitched someone else's face over his own, and it looked like that of a woman's, an older one. We put two and two together and arrested him for the woman's murder. He cried and yelled and even charged the paramedics, proclaiming his innocence even after confessing. He said he was forced to do what he did, claiming that if he hadn't, then the man in the sewer would come for him. When John and I finished our reports that night and got back into our cruiser, there was silence. I knew then that he was a changed man, this rookie. Myself, not so much. But although I had experienced these things before, they never failed to petrify me. I knew of the sleepless nights to come from this experience. I gave John a lecture with the side of my eye as I turned the key and drove us out of there, opening his window for him. "Have some fresh air, buddy." But he was expressionless, and with each streetlight we drove under, I saw the sweat on his forehead and around his eyes. I didn't tell John what I'm about to tell you. He wouldn't have been able to handle it. When we finally got in the cruiser and reversed out of there, I saw something. John couldn't get in the car and slam the door quick enough, but I took my time, and by doing so, witnessed it. As I put my hand on the driver's side door to open it, I caught a glow in the distance. Down the street, I saw a pair of glowing eyes descend into the ground, back into a sewer, clasping the cap over itself. I'm a police detective, and I cover every mirror in my house at night. I became a detective a little over 1 year ago after spending 5 years on the beat. Any case I've worked on has always been clear-cut, No questions left unanswered, concrete evidence, confessions. But there was one case, is still one case, that leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Questions of which, I suspect, may not have an answer grounded in scientific rationale. A disclaimer before I begin. I'm not superstitious, nor do I believe in ghosts or anything that can be termed paranormal. Having said that, here's what happened. I didn't choose this case, but rather it was thrust upon me with the death of a colleague who was in charge of its investigation. He was a senior detective, 28 years experience. On the morning after the first night of the investigation, he was found dead in his home. His body was huddled into the back of the walk-in closet of his bedroom. The coroner cited sudden cardiac arrest as the cause of death. The bedroom door and the door to the closet were both shut at the time, and the photographs, I'll have more to say about them later. I was given a case file on a family of 3 who were living in a small flat in the Isle of Wight, UK. The family were Korean immigrants. There was a father, mother, and an infant girl. The case involved the sudden death of the 38-year-old mother. She was found collapsed on the floor of her bedroom. As the crime scene reports indicated, she seemed to have died in the middle of applying her makeup. More to follow. The husband, who was initially suspected to be the perpetrator, committed suicide a few days later. He was questioned for 48 hours, then released, due to return 24 hours later. He was found in his van in the garage of a block of flats. A hose was attached to the exhaust, with the other end stuck in his window. The air vents were duct taped shut. The infant girl was never found and was passed on to the missing persons case officers, although now I think she will never ever be found. When I visited the crime scene itself, things in the flat and some further evidence that I had collected just didn't seem right. I would even say unnatural. Together with a junior detective, I visited the scene roughly 70 hours after the incident took place. It was still classified as a warm crime scene. That is to say, things were mostly left untouched, and as they were at the time of discovery. Some evidence was removed, however. I'll start with the kitchen. On the counter next to the sink were diced pumpkins, dried and crusty, and in a bowl next to it, some pieces had been mashed into a fine paste. This was presumably for the baby girl. The living room was otherwise normal. It was clean and well maintained. There was a large bookshelf on the southern wall of the room which housed around 50 books. All of the books were in Korean, so naturally, I couldn't understand the titles, but when I opened some of them, they all appeared to deal with subjects relating to the occult or traditional Korean pagan beliefs. I gathered this from the photographs and the drawings. On the arm of the sofa, a book was open at a page which showed a zodiac calendar. It looked like a traditional Chinese one with all the animals around it. Next to this was a diary, the mother's, open at a yearly calendar page. A large red circle was around one of the dates. Incidentally, this was the date her body was found and the day that the daughter went missing. At this time, my partner mentioned he had a Korean friend growing up in London. He added that whenever he went to their house at night, all of the mirrors in the house were covered with sheets. He asked his friend about this, who said, embarrassed, that it was a silly Korean superstition. At night, he was told, witches can enter this world through mirrors. They come to our world to steal babies and bring them back to hell with them. I shrugged this information off when I heard it, a silly superstition. I'd still like to believe that now. On the table in the middle of the room was a small bowl of half-eaten pumpkin mash. There had been something which the initial crime scene investigators had marked on the floor beside the table. There was a long line of something on the floor from just next to the table which ran across the room, through the kitchen, and into the parents' bedroom, incidentally the site of the mother's body. Taking a close look, I could see it was a long, thin streak of saliva which contained traces of pumpkin. Every few feet or so between the living room table and the bedroom could be found small puddles of saliva with the pumpkin mixed with it. This suggests, as per the initial police report, that the baby had crawled from the table to the bedroom and came to a stop at the dresser. My partner asked me for permission to go and ask further questions of the residents living on the same floor, and I was left in the flat alone to continue my investigations into the other rooms. It was in the bedroom where I experienced something that to this day I cannot explain. I looked at the spot on the floor where the mother's body was found. The cause of death was ruled as a severe heart attack, and death was instant. This is in spite of her having no history of cardiac illness, nor any such instances in her immediate family. The photos of her body show her face up, her face suggesting she died in a state of shock or fear. Her eyes were wide open and bulging from their sockets, her mouth jarred agape as far as it could. She was frozen like this, as if someone had shown her a scary image and pressed pause on her reaction. That's the best way I can describe her state in the photograph. She was clutching a hairbrush too. Now I'll tell you about the mirror that was sitting atop the dresser. It was a normal looking vanity mirror, pearl inlay border and propped up by a small stand at the back. It looked like an antique. Perhaps it's something I've acquired in my years on the job, call it an intuitive sense, but I could sense something coming from the mirror. It had a presence, one that was not existent in the other rooms. It was as if the mirror was the focal point of the entire room. It occupied the whole space as if it were alive. What is more, any time I turned away from it, I felt a sense of being watched. I know it sounds corny and cliched, but I know when I'm being watched. Not only watched, but menaced. It comes with the job and is a necessary survival tool for any law enforcement person. As I was standing in front of the mirror with my back to it, looking at another part of the room, I felt an overwhelming sense of danger from behind. It felt like an impending blow to the head. There was definitely an intent to harm. Startled, I spun around. I immediately noticed my reflection in the mirror. The reflection was of me, of course, but it was me from behind. I was looking at myself from a position behind my body, as if through someone else's eyes. Then the image in the mirror started to slowly lurch toward me. In a flash, I pulled my firearm out of my hip holster and spun around. There was just an empty room, the same as it had been when I entered. I spun back around to face the mirror, gun still held at eye level, and the reflection was of me again, from the front. I stood like this for quite some time, half expecting the image in the mirror to change again. Once my heart stopped beating in my throat, I holstered my weapon and checked around the mirror for anything like a pinhole camera or other device that might make it possible to project an image on its surface from a remote source. A check of the bedroom also revealed no such devices. I decided to take the mirror as more evidence of the crime scene. Perhaps forensics can find something with it and, more to the point, find something that would give me peace of mind about what I had just seen. I put the mirror in a sealed plastic evidence bag and placed it on the back seat, then called my partner's radio to tell him we were leaving. The whole time driving back to the station, I had the sensation that someone was sitting in the back seat. So strong was the sensation, and still feeling rattled from what I experienced in the flat, I grew fearsome of looking in the rearview mirror. After handing in the mirror to the forensics team, I decided to look over the case photos again, and as I did so, I became aware of a terrifying similarity. All of the deceased, including my senior who passed several days before, all had the same expression on their face. The only words to describe it would be pure horror. The ways their eyes had distended in terror, their mouths distorted in their final scream or plea for mercy, and the way they all seemed to be trying to escape from whatever they were seeing. The mother's body was turned in one direction, her head twisted in the other. The father had his head buried into the cushions of the back seat of the car, and the senior detective was cowering in fear at the back of his closet, which contained a full-length mirror. All three had died in front of a mirror of some sort. Had they seen what I saw? That day, as I was leaving, I happened to bump into the forensics officer whom I handed the mirror to. "Evening, sir," he said. "We had a spot of trouble with your mirror." "Oh?" I said. "Yeah, we couldn't get to the handprint that was left on it." I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. There may indeed have been a handprint on it, but in my haste to leave, I failed to notice it. "Handprint?" I asked. "Yeah, tiny little thing, like this." He spread his thumb and index finger apart to indicate the size of the hand. "I'd say they were about 8 or 9 months old, definitely an infant." He shook his head in disbelief. This sent an ice-cold wave of recognition through me. It must belong to the daughter. "What do you mean you couldn't get to it?" I asked. He waited for 2 other staff to walk past and out of earshot before he answered. "Well, the handprint, sir." He looked around again. "It had been put on the glass from the other side." "The other side of what?" I asked. "The mirror," he said. My stomach sank, and I instantly thought of the things my partner had told me about the superstitions involving mirrors. "Are you sure?" I pressed him. "We're fairly sure, sir. We've taken thousands of prints from glass surfaces and other reflective materials, but we've never seen anything like this." He held up his hands. "It's a mystery." I started to feel lightheaded. He patted me on the shoulder. "But that's for you guys to solve, right?" With that cheerful jibe, he left me standing confused and exhausted in the corridor. I remained that way until his footsteps receded out of earshot. The mirror was never used as evidence, and it was consigned to a file cabinet somewhere in storage, never to be taken out or spoken of again. The handprint was just passed off as a manufacturing defect. The whole case is now cold, unsolved. 2 sudden deaths of natural causes, a missing child, and a suicide from being unable to cope with the grief. That's how it ended. For me, however, I cover every mirror in the house when the sun goes down. My final call as a police dispatcher has scarred me. I'd worked as a police dispatcher for 9 years of my life. It's a career that takes a level of mental fortitude that I don't think many people possess. I used to hate saying stuff like that. I always thought it sounded so pretentious. But the truth is, it takes a special type of person to be willing to voluntarily listen to some of the things we have to hear every single day. Don't get me wrong, the job wasn't always grim. It even had its decent moments. I've got enough decently funny drunk 911 call stories to last me several lifetimes, though the reality of the job was usually far darker. I understood that though, and felt that I was more than equipped to deal with anything the job could throw at me. I was right. For a while. For years I had answered every call, always able to keep a steady head despite being faced with some horrific situations. My confidence in my ability to handle the job unwavering, until the final call I ever took as a police dispatcher. I glanced at the time displayed at the corner of my computer screen, 11:43. I yawned, leaning back in my chair with my arms extended as I stretched my back. I'd been at the desk since 3 in the afternoon, answering calls and dispatching officers as they were needed, which wasn't very often in this town. I lived in a little port town in Washington, about an hour or so out of Seattle, and though we weren't without our fair share of crime, our phones never rang off the hook, which meant a lot of free time for me. I was always okay with that. As soul-wrenching as many of the calls could be, moments of respite were always more than welcome. A notification on my screen caught my attention, and in an instant I had returned to my seat, headset on. 911, what's your emergency? I spoke into my headset as automatically as any line repeated hundreds or thousands of times can be spoken. For a moment, the line was only dead silence before I heard a reply. I need a policeman. I think somebody is in my house," a child whispered from the other line. I felt the smallest of knots beginning to form in my stomach. I shifted in my seat. "Do you know your address?" I asked, adopting a firm but lighter tone in response to the caller's age. I heard shuffling and heavy breathing from the other end, followed by a faint, "Wait." The caller returned and whispered their address. She was a little girl by the sound of her voice, and she sounded scared. "Good job. What about your phone number?" The process repeated, and I quickly relayed her information to dispatched officers. Her address was on the edge of town, a little out of the way, and I understood that it may be a while before help arrived. I stifled a sigh, not wanting to vocalize my worry as I received an estimated arrival time. "Is there an adult with you in the house?" I continued. "No," the little girl replied breathlessly, and I could hear anxiety rising in her voice as she spoke. My mum works late and my sister, There was a pause, followed by an audible sniffle. She's camping with her friends and somewhere on her end of the line, there was a crash, then a scream. My heart dropped. Are you still there? Are you alright? There was a repetitive thumping sound followed by the slam of a door. I'm here, the little girl spoke breathlessly into the phone. Are you alright? I repeated the question. Yes, was all she replied, barely above a whisper. Her tone worried me. She sounded more than afraid. Sad? No, disturbed was the proper word for it. Then she began to cry. Not as quiet as you might expect given her situation, but a deep, helpless sob that made my heart sink. When she spoke, it stopped altogether. Please, please, please help me. Her sobs turned into a hysteric cry, and I could hear loud, repetitive thumps from her end. Footsteps, and they were clearly not hers. They were heavy, far too heavy for a little girl. Without warning, a shrill cry, like the sound of microphone feedback, rang through my headset. The sudden assault on my ears caused me to jump, and my heart set off racing like a jackrabbit. I fought the instinct to throw off the headset, and instead clenched my eyes shut as the noise faded as instantly as it had come. I saw it, she sputtered through sobs. Oh, please, please, I don't know what it is. The frantic and frenzied nature of her begging increased, and a strangeness began to settle in the air that I couldn't quite place. A quick glance around the room confirmed that most of the desks around me were empty, and I was in on the call alone. The thought made me feel very isolated, and a growing uneasiness continued to take hold of me that I couldn't place. Something about the call just felt wrong. Police are on the way, I began. I tried to infuse the statement with my usual level of assertiveness and confidence, but I worried that the uneasiness may be audible in my voice. Can you tell me your name? I asked. Amber. All right, Amber. Are you or can you get somewhere safe? A room with a door you can lock. I'm in my room, she said through sniffles, and it was obvious that she had been crying profusely. I locked the door. Good. I'm going to stay with you on the line. Is there anywhere for you to hide? The sound of footsteps grew in the background as her voice lowered to a whisper. I think under the bed, she whimpered. Okay, is there... I paused, thinking over my words before continuing. Anything you can use to protect yourself? There was silence on her end for a moment, followed by a hushed, yes. As she dropped the phone, I assumed to get a weapon. The clamour from within the house had grown closer to the phone, and the piercing ringing sound had returned. I was almost certain that there had to be something wrong with my headset or with Amber's phone, and the sound grew to an almost unbearable extent, matched only by deafening thuds from somewhere on the phone. It sounded too close. I could feel the hairs begin to rise on the back of my neck, and the ominous sense of panic began to give way to an unexplained fear. The urge to look over my shoulder grew harder to fight, as the persistent thudding sound grew louder, nearer. It all sounded too clear, I guess. There was no static, none of the white noise typical of a phone call. Nothing. Just the sound of footsteps approaching closer, closer. I gave in to my instinct, whipping around in my seat, nearly losing my headset. No one. I had no time to settle my nerves as Amber returned to the line. Are you there? She whispered, yanking me from my fog and back into the moment. Yes, I replied. I struggled to shake off my fears. Something was very wrong with this situation. Despite my worries, I shifted my attention back to Amber. There isn't any weapon, the girl muttered. But I have something. There was a pause. Okay, what do you have? I asked, realizing my prompt was necessary. A rabbit. A pink rabbit, she said, and even over the phone, I could hear a little embarrassment. My dad gave her to me when I was little, she sniffled. He said that she would keep me safe. I didn't know what to say for a moment, but I didn't want to miss a beat. He was right, I said as encouragingly as I could. Everyone knows pink bunnies are great protection. Can you go back under... I was interrupted. Amber, I miss you. I could hear a man call from within the house. So the intruder knew her. I furrowed my brow. "Amber, do you recognize that voice?" I asked, hoping she could identify the intruder. There was silence for a moment before her response. "It sounds like my dad. Why does it sound like my dad?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "That's my daddy's voice. Why does it have my daddy's voice?" I didn't know how to respond to that. Hell, I didn't know what to think about. Had his voice? Before I could ask what she meant, we were interrupted by a sound. The thing we heard has taken me years to try to understand. I've come to believe it was that thing's laugh. At the time, though, we couldn't know. It was the sound of metal crunching in a car accident as it met flesh, a wet, grinding shriek that shook me to my core. I wanted to vomit, and my vision began to blur. I can only imagine what it was like for Amber hearing all that in person. "Amber," I panted, my senses returning to me all at once. She barely had time to respond before we heard it. A voice, or voices, calling for her from somewhere nearby. They spoke as one, all with the same odd, inhumane nature, dripping with malintent. "Amber." My blood froze. Amber began to cry, and her cries eventually becoming pleas as she begged for help, her life, her mother, and my intervention. Five more minutes, just 5 more minutes, I muttered, mentally cursing the timer which displayed the estimated arrival time of the officers. I prayed it would be soon enough. "It's outside the room," she whispered, her voice one of utter panic, before breaking into a quiet sob. I silently swore under my breath. "Amber, I need you to hide right now if possible. The police are 3 minutes away. Stay as quiet as possible." There was no response, but I assumed from the shuffling sounds I could hear that she had gone back under the bed. For a few moments there was silence. Then Amber spoke, and my heart dropped. "I'm going to die." "You're not going to die, Amber," I began, worry now audible in my voice. "I promise." "It's reaching under the door. Oh my God," she muttered. There was a crash, louder than before, and Amber began to shriek. The noises continued, and it began to dawn on me what I was hearing. It was breaking down the bedroom door. Amber's screams had devolved into horrified babbling and pleas for her life to whatever was on the other side of the door. Her screams were soon drowned out by the same noises before, that sick damn laughter. "What are you?" Amber shrieked, loud enough to make my ears ring. "Please, what are you? What are you?" It mocked, in a voice that was some sick parody of Amber's. Panic gripped me as I glanced back at the corner of the monitor displaying the dispatch unit's arrival time, 1:36. Please God, let it be soon enough. "Amber, are you there?" I called. "Amber." As suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. Somewhere in the distance, I heard sirens. "I hear them, Amber. Officers are a minute away." Silence. My heart began to sink. "Amber, are you there?" I could hear something shifting, breathing. I think it's gone," Amber said. A surge of relief rolled through me, and I let out a sigh and leaned back in the chair. 12:27, the dispatch time read, and the sirens in the background grew louder. "You did very well, Amber. Police are almost there. You did really well." I couldn't think of what else to say. I'd never had a call like this, and something about it all felt so strange. Something Amber had said began to ring in my mind. "What are you?" "Amber," I began, "what did you see?" I was met with silence. "Amber?" Amber began to laugh. "Amber?" I said, my voice pleading, a wave of realization crashing down on me. The laughter grew more raucous and less human with every sound. Somewhere in the background, there was a knocking sound. They'd finally arrived. Too late. I asked the only thing I could think of at the moment. Why? The laughter stopped abruptly as the thing on the phone spoke. "It was fun." There was a click and the line went dead. The house was empty when officers arrived. No signs of forced entry anywhere except the door to Amber's bedroom, the bottom of which had been torn away by something, leaving a wide space to crawl beneath. And Amber, or what was left of her, decorated the room. Whatever had been there had left nothing behind to identify it, only carnage. The case was never officially closed, and everyone had their theories as to what had happened that day, ranging from serial killers to a bear attack, and everything in between. The call was never made public. Not my decision, but not one I necessarily complained about either. I never want to hear that recording again. I put in my 2 weeks notice that same night, though I never wanted to return to work after that day. I'd been content to try and forget about that call. As callous as it may sound, I was content trying to forget about Amber, to forget whatever I had spoken to on that phone, but I don't think it's done with me. Last night I dreamed, or thought I was dreaming, the sounds of footsteps running throughout my house, as something screeched and laughed and mocked me just outside my bedroom door. I stayed in bed long into the morning despite the sounds having stopped, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and confusion, until eventually I convinced myself to leave the bed. I crossed the room, cursing every creak the floor made under my weight. I lowered myself to the ground, holding my breath as I peered under my bedroom door. There was something there, but it wasn't moving. I mustered up the little bravery I had left and rose to my feet, my eyes shut tight and a prayer on my lips. I pulled open my bedroom door slightly and stuck my head out, just enough to see what lay outside. I stifled a gasp and tears flooded my eyes as I bent over to pick up the object. Placed right outside my door was a little pink bunny, covered in dark stains. From somewhere within the darkness, just beyond the bedroom door, Amber's laughter echoed. I've been a police detective for many years. We got a terrifying call that led to the scariest night of my life. "There's something in the hospital," she screamed. "It's not human." I listened over my shoulder as dispatch spoke calmly, the night's first event. "Ma'am, slow down, please. I know you're scared. Please slow down and go over it one more time." Marty gestured towards me as if to say, "You better come listen to this one." I obliged, walking over to his desk as he put the frantic woman on speaker. "It's not human," she repeated, more clearly this time. Marty and I exchanged a look. "Is it some type of animal? Maybe a black bear?" he asked, the town named Bears Creek for a reason. "I know what a bear is. We need help." I'd heard enough, knowing that this was a 10-to-1 prank call, but still having an odd feeling about the whole thing nonetheless. "Tell her I'm on my way. 5 minutes." As I hurried out the door towards my patrol car, I heard the first screams begin on the other end of the line. Prank calls had become more common, especially during this time of the year, but the screams sounded real enough. It was almost 5 minutes on the dot when I sped through the old iron gate and towards the front entrance to the hospital. An eerie feeling washed over me. I hated this place. It gave me the creeps. Built in 1914, the ancient spot had been a mental asylum far before it had reopened its doors years later, coincidentally enough to care for patients this time. But this time there had been no hydrotherapy or shock treatments, and certainly no lobotomies. A chill went through me as the not-so-distant screams filled my ears. "Marty, better call in backup. I'm going inside." I spoke into the radio before unsnapping my Glock and heading up the old stone steps into Raven's hospital. Dr. Raven had been one of the most prestigious brain surgeons in the country, or so the rumor had it, and the hospital had been aptly named after him upon its reopening. As I made it to the top of the steps, the screams intensified. It was unlike anything I'd heard before. They were so loud that I found myself reaching one hand to my ears before getting a better hold of myself and trying to calm my nerves. There was a pool of bright red blood dripping off the highest step, and down into the white rose bushes just below. My eyes noted that the closest patch of them weren't white at all anymore, but a deep red. I burst into the hospital, ready for whatever the hell I might meet, when two things happened all at once. The screams stopped, and the lights went out. What the hell? I said to myself, reaching one hand for my flashlight. I'd be lying if I told you the thought of waiting for backup hadn't occurred to me, but I wasn't about to just abandon these people. "Police!" I managed to say, hoping that the words didn't come out as shaky as I felt inside. This is the police. Is anyone here?" Silence. Now, I ask you, what would you have done at such a moment? Yes, nothing about this was right, and I knew that. But would you have really walked back outside and waited for other officers? If there was indeed an animal here, or perhaps something even worse, how many more people would have been injured or killed in those short minutes? No. I bet my old pickup that you would have gone further down into the hallway too. And that's just what I did, trying to hold the flashlight steady as my nerves increased. I caught a glimpse of the first sign as I walked under it. Floor 1. Pediatric. Yet there was no sign of any child, and I couldn't understand where the hell all those screams had been coming from. The beam of my flashlight pierced the darkness of the nearest room, and upon a quick glimpse around, I found nothing there as well. I made my way to the stairwell and was headed up to the second floor when I heard the soft murmur of a child crying behind me. Following the noise, I turned back around, the cries intensifying, and I followed. Room 8, Room 7. As I approached the 6th room, the child's cries were now so loud that I had to cover my left ear with my free hand. At the end of the night, there would still be a small puddle of blood dripping down my lobe and onto my blue officer's shirt. I would sustain a 25% hearing loss for the rest of my life. As I got closer, the child's wailing began to send a shiver down my spine. There was laughter present in those cries, and it seemed that with each step closer I took, the laughter grew. Have you ever heard a child playfully laugh in anticipation of receiving a gift? Perhaps the bright red bike their parents had promised, perhaps a new puppy. The closer I got, the more the child's wailing seemed to turn into laughter, and that soft, joyful sound beckoned me to enter room number 6. And I did. Perhaps you won't believe this next part. I was there that night, and I still barely do. As I stepped across the hallway and into the room, the darkness was somehow much thicker, like a wool blanket hanging just inches in front of my eyes. I could see nothing at first, but I could hear. I could hear that laughter increase, and I detected the sound of scratching. But it wasn't on the floor, nor was it on the walls. It was coming from above me. I glanced up to see the small shape of a child scurrying rapidly across the ceiling, and I nearly lost it. If ever there was a point in my life where I came close to fainting, that would have been it. The child's red eyes glowed down at me as I watched it race in every way possible across the walls, ceiling, and the windows of the room. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, taking a step backwards towards the hallway and following the figure with my Glock the best I could. I made out another dark shape in the room then, and as my eyes adjusted, I came to be sure it was that of another child. This looked to be a real child though, far different than the demonic creature racing across the walls that seemed to take a great pleasure in scaring the absolute hell out of me. The little girl was sobbing in the far corner of the room, and looked to be holding a doll or a teddy bear for comfort. Just as her eyes met mine, the creature stopped moving. I looked up again to see those red eyes staring down into mine, just as its soft voice began to speak. "One chance, detective." It smiled wide. "I'm only going to give you one chance to save her." I was speechless, yet I understood its threat. The little girl was to my left and the thing was to my right, but I knew that if I made a dash, I could never reach her before it could. Still, I tried anyway, taking a quick step towards the girl to pull her out of the room. Before I could get anywhere near her, the thing scurried rapidly. It would be untruthful for me to say that courage was responsible for what happened next. I was terrified. It was only reflex. I put 3 bullets into the thing's chest and 1 into its skull. As it dropped from the ceiling and fell only 2 feet in front of the small figure sitting alone in the corner of the room. Before I could grab her, I heard the distinct voices of my friends in the hallway behind it. The cavalry had finally arrived. "Come on," I said, picking the child up and cradling her in my arms. When I reached the other officers, I didn't go into full detail of what had happened, only telling them that there was something in the room, that I had shot at it, and that I wasn't sure if it were really dead. When they entered, they found nothing. Well, nothing except a small puddle of something thick and black leading to an open window. They told me later that they had thought it was tar initially, as it was far too solid to be something like blood. Later on that night, when I was back at the station, they asked me to go into greater detail about what I had seen. Having had an hour or so to think it over, I decided to leave out the more frightening events. Everyone that witnessed what happened that night did the same, and the final police report stated something along the lines of an unidentified wild animal, which was obviously crap. I suspected many of the hospital workers that night saw the same thing I did, and I know for certain that one little girl out there knows the truth. And though we never talked about it, that little girl, now an adult, still sends me a Christmas card every year. The same words, always written in cursive on the lower half. "Thank you for saving me. Your friend, Evelyn." Though I know the words she has written before reading them, they still always manage to catch me by surprise, and they still always bring a smile to my old face. That frightening place was my first meeting with evil, and my first encounter with the things of this world that cannot be explained. I found a tape of an old police interview. I was just clearing out the old tapes from the precinct storage room. There was no one around, so for my own amusement, I decided to listen to some old interviews with witnesses and suspects. I popped quite a lot of them into the record player, one after the other. A few of them were quite entertaining, like the one of two sorority girls having been caught in a vicious, purse-wielding duel to the deaths. For obvious reasons, I stayed away from the homicides and other serious stuff. Soon after sifting through a few more, I came across this one tape, just marked Harris. My curiosity got the better of me, and so I popped it in. This tape was the one that made me finally quit my job. I had been wanting to quit for a while, but this one really was the last straw. I did not want to be reminded that stuff like this had ever taken place. I have transcribed the entire tape onto here. Forgive me for any mistakes, I just wanted to get it out as quickly as possible to share it with someone. I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to use the full names. Don't bother Googling them, you won't find anything. Believe me, I tried. The sound of a loud fan whirring. Someone coughs audibly. A chair creaks as someone sits down. Okay, so we are here with... Can you state your full name for the record, please? Desmond Harris. But Mama used to call me Des, actually. So you can if you want. I'll go with Mr. Harris for now. So Mr. Harris, can you tell me what happened right from the starting? The starting? Yes, the starting. Well, it all actually started when I first returned home to my mama. She had been sick lately, so I wanted to take care of her. Your home as in a little town called Redacted. It's right next to this city. You should visit sometime. The people are really friendly. I remember one time I accidentally got stuck in one of the trees, and there was no one home, so I just screamed, hoping that someone would hear me. Mr. Harris, if we could please get back to your story. Yes, of course, alright. So as I said, I went home to my mama. She was right delighted to see me. I mean, she even already had my favorite breakfast made, despite not knowing I was going to be there. I always knew she had perfect intuition. And when had you reached your hometown? November 31st, 2003. Yeah, that's it. Mr. Harris, there is no November 31st. Oh, there isn't? Oh, I'm sorry. That must have been December 1st. I do always get my dates mixed up. It's a real problem. Someone laughs awkwardly in the background. Okay, so she had my favorite breakfast set up, and she had this huge, giant grin on her face. That was when I started suspecting that something was wrong. You suspected something was wrong because she was smiling? Not smiling, she was straight up grinning. Mama always smiled so daintily, so softly. It made you feel so comfortable. This one was almost uncomfortable. I did not think it was her. It was that parasite. Parasite? What kind of parasite? Not your usual kind, that's for sure. Anyway, over the next few days, I started noticing even stranger and stranger things. Really unusual ones. Can you give me some examples of the things that you found unusual? Okay, well, for example, one night I was sitting in the living room watching the television. SpongeBob was on. You know that episode where Squidward and SpongeBob deliver pizza to a customer? I really love that one. Always reminded me of the time when I was young and Mr. Harris. Oh yes, of course. So I was on the couch watching SpongeBob when I heard the screen door slam shut. It was the one out on the porch. It was not a particularly windy night and the door was locked anyway. So I got up to check it out and the voice trailed off. Mr. Harris, what did you find? The voice continues, now sounding broken. Mama, she was just curled up near the patio chair. Her body was rocking back and forth like a damn rocking horse. So I kneel down towards her and say, Mama, it's cold. Why don't you come back inside? And then she looks up with these dead eyes. I swear on Lord Jesus, those eyes held a dearth of life in them. And then she opened her mouth and just screamed. For a few seconds, no one speaks. Then I knew that parasite was back again. It had taken my father and now it wanted her too. It was gonna latch onto her, corrupt her, taint her. Oh my sweet lord, Mr. Harris, are you feeling alright? Yeah, don't pretend to care for me. I know time is running out. I'll continue. Over the next few days, I saw Mama slowly deteriorating. She grew frail, her eyes always shaky and never staying in one place. She was skittish, the slightest noise scaring her. Sometimes she even seemed to be scared of me. And that damn parasite, it had now slowly latched itself onto her completely. She had been corrupted. What do you think that parasite exactly was? I had a brush with it in my past, my dad. Now I knew the same thing was happening to Mama too. Getting hollowed out from inside out, going crazy and then just... never mind. One day I woke up and got out of bed to go to the bathroom. Now I did not have my slippers on as our bathroom has its own slippers, so I could not be bothered to put mine on. Where are you going with this exactly? I have a point to this. So I was not wearing any slippers, no socks either. And then when I came out the bathroom door, my feet hit a slimy surface and I slipped and fell. And when I looked down to see what it was, you can bet that I immediately wished I had never set sight on it. According to your earlier reports, it was fecal matter, was it not? Don't start with your flowery language. It was a behemoth piece of crap, and you and I both know it. Mr. Harris, if you could please stop swearing. This is a police precinct. Oh, screw you. I've had enough with your patronization. I will leave right now. Mr. Harris, stop. You can't leave. There were sounds of struggling and grunts, but soon the man sat back down onto the chair with a loud sigh. Were you angry at your mother for what had happened? Not at all. I was disgusted, sure, but Mama had wiped off my turds countless times. She didn't get out of her room anymore after that. She was getting sicker and sicker by the day. She could hardly even speak to me anymore. She often just urinated on the carpet or anywhere she pleased. Her room reeked of it. One day, I finally gathered up the courage to clear it out. I had to go in wearing a mask to clean it. And you know what I found in there, just on her pillow? What did you find, Mr. Harris? I found this giant clot of blood, black, gungy and disgusting, thick and shiny like tar. It was about the size of a saucer, writhing and slowly pulsating, like a human heart. I kid you not, at that moment I almost threw up. And when I touched it with my gloved hand, a swarm of flies just flew out and across the room. Your mother, what had happened to her for that to happen? I have no idea, and for God's sake, she had been sleeping on that thing on her pillow for who knew how long. Enough to breed maggots and let them grow, that's for sure. Then throughout that day and the next, I could see a shadow in my periphery. If Mama was present in the room, it was right there too. Right in the corner of my vision. If I looked directly at it, it went away. I had experienced the same thing with my father. The day I saw the shadow around him was the day he died, and so did Mama. The man breaks down, his sobs audible through the tape. "How did your mother die, Mr. Harris?" That parasite killed her, that damn parasite. It chewed her out from the inside and killed her. It killed my mother." "Mr. Harris, did you kill your mother?" How dare you accuse me of that?" There was the sound of a crash and a yell. A door opens. The screams grow louder and louder until they finally receded behind a closed door. There was complete silence until a shaky voice finally spoke up. "This was Officer Brighton with the suspect, 56-year-old Desmond Harris, who has been charged with the murder of 72-year-old Greta Harris by slow poisoning. He's also been accused of having murdered 47-year-old Terrence Harris 30 years ago, the investigation of which is still underway. The defense pleads not guilty by reasons of insanity." Tales from a rural police officer. I'm an old man now, recently diagnosed with a terminal illness and given less than 6 months to live. I've had no children, though my dear wife and I wanted to so badly. She was eaten up with the cancer before she was 25 and had to have that surgery that removed all of her female organs. They took the playground but left the slide, so to speak. When I was 23, I went to a police academy in Louisville, Kentucky. I graduated with honors at the top of my class and was assigned to a post in a tiny little rural town that shall remain nameless. I will not reveal the name of the town, the county, nor the true names of the suspect herein. I've wanted to tell these stories to someone for years, but I was worried about the NDAs I had signed when I took the assignment. What are they going to do to me now? Eat me? Take my birthday? Hell, I don't have hope for seeing my next birthday anyway. My first strange call-out was in May of '77. I was parked at a local truck stop, watching for speeders and irresponsible drivers alike. My God, it was hot that day. I was sweating like Satan's nutsack. I remember right before the radio cracked to life, things seemed to change. I went from just plain hot and sweaty to being overwhelmed with a type of primal panic. When the static from the radio broke through, I thought I'd crapped myself. "Car 75, come in." "Car 75, copy." "Car 75, dispatch has you parked at the local truck stop. Is that your current 20? "Yes, dispatch, that's my 20, over." "Good. We just received a call from an anonymous citizen that claimed to see a big black rig speeding down the road toward the coal mine. Said the truck was all over the road and nearly ran over the school bus. Reports the rig has some kind of big bulldog hanging in the windscreen as an identifier. Would you roll to the mine and report?" "Copy that, dispatch." I rolled my cruiser to the mine, lights only, speeding and driving safe at the same time. So I know that can be done okay. I didn't ever stop anyone for just speeding. Anyway, I turned down Rural Highway 3356 to the old Dolma mine. I was about a mile up that road when I saw the smoke from a rig. He had to have been absolutely rolling coal. There was 4-foot columns of black smoke billowing from the stacks of the old Mac. I closed the gap between the two of us and flipped the siren on, trying to get the driver to slow down and pull over. The road was too narrow for me to get on his side, so I couldn't force his butt off the road, and my presence behind him didn't seem to affect his speed. I looked to the driver's door to try and identify the driver, but the windows were as black as the paint. At one point, we were traveling at 95 miles an hour down a 1.5 lane highway with no way for another vehicle to pass. I called to dispatch and told them to please close the road at the other end. It took 3 minutes for 2 other cruisers to go the short way around town and block the road. Now, we don't know if any other vehicles managed to turn onto this road in that time. So, it's a bobtailing Mack sleeper cab and a police cruiser traveling almost 100 miles an hour down a narrow, twisty, hilly road in the middle of ducking nowhere. The only damn thing on that road was a trailer park we already flew by, and mine site that had been shut down last year that we were traveling towards. Very few homes were on that road at that time, thankfully. During the pursuit, dispatch advised that I was granted permission to immobilize the rig if possible. I unholstered my service revolver and steadied it out the window at the outermost rear left wheel. All 6 shots hit the tire. I watched it swell and distort each time, but it never even slowed the driver down. I reported to dispatch and was told to refrain from further aggression and to drop my speed to match the legal limit, since the guy had nowhere to go. I hated to do it, but an order is an order. I backed off the throttle and allowed the truck to pull ahead. It slowed down too. I shook my head. I remember thinking something along the lines of, "Oh, this guy is really annoying me now." As a side note, back then it wasn't rare for the cops and the good old boys to rough each other up during an arrest. It was almost expected with certain subjects. I will admit, I planned to warm this guy's head. He could have killed the kids on that bus. He would have killed any car traveling the opposite direction on that road. As the pair of us slowed down, the black smoke emanating from the stacks took on a different quality. They shimmered like a heat-induced mirage. It was odd. As they shimmered, I felt myself being drawn to the shapes. I had to fight to remain in control of my vehicle. At one point, about 100 yards from the old mine entrance, the truck dipped down a hill, and for less than a second, my view of it was blocked. When I popped over the hill, it was gone. No smoke, no wreck. It didn't skid off the road, it didn't pull off and hide. It was just gone. Car 75 to dispatch, over. Car 75, this is dispatch. Dispatch, report the subject from the pursuit on 3356 has vanished. Repeat, the big rig is gone. Car 75, the units at the end of the road haven't reported seeing the truck, but have reported hearing it tear through the mine, over. Dispatch, that's impossible. We haven't gotten that far as of yet. Car 75, check and respond, over. I sped to the mine entrance. Since the place had closed down, they had installed one of those swinging iron gates at the entrance. It had been crushed in. The damage was old and already heavily rusted, so I know it wasn't the Mac. I proceeded to travel the rough gravel road up the hill to the plateau of the mountain where the strip mine was. The roads twisted and turned on their way up, with several switchbacks, each at a 90-degree angle. No way a rig could speed up there, and hell, it was all I could do to turn my boat over forward and not have to back up and take another stab. I reached the plateau, and sitting against the edge of the dig, where the mining company lost the coal, crushed against the rock, was an old, rusted rig. It looked as though it had rolled down the mountain and had been towed up there and placed out of the way. I stopped my cruiser and got out to inspect. As I got closer, I could tell the truck had burned. Most of the paint was fine and replaced by a couple of years of rust. I approached the driver's side of the mangled cab and was amazed to find the door opened. The door jambs hadn't burnt the paint off and were as black as the coal dust I walked on. I stared at the wreckage for a moment, and that's when I saw it. A big silver Mac dog flat emblem hanging from the top of the cab. Dispatch rolled the other 2 cars to my 20 when I didn't reply to radio calls. They found me, crouched beside the cab, staring at the blob of metal that I still have. I know I saw it as a bulldog, but when they arrived, it was a misshapen blob of crusty aluminium. Nobody knew what to make of the call-out or the situation. We eventually reported the rig got away. Later that year, I would learn the truck driver rolled his truck with twin buckets full of coal off the side of the mountain one day, 8 years before I chased him down that road. I guess he makes the trip once a year. I was called out for it the next year, but didn't bother to speed after him. I just drove to the mine and placed a silver bulldog on the rusted hulk.